Hey, welcome once again to Rise of the GM. Today, we're going to be talking about an undersea rescue. There's going to be a mercenary in training as our NPC, but we are focusing on combat encounters in our Rolling the Dice series here on Rise of the GM. Well, hey, Adam, we are back again here on Rise of the GM. We are in the middle of our Rolling Dice. I said rolling the dice earlier, but it's rolling dice. It's concise. But we're on combat encounters. Last week we talked about social encounters. This week we get to one of those of the three main pillars, kind of exploring combat and social encounters. Now we're at the combat, and this is probably the biggest pillar. So it'll be fun to talk about that. How are you doing? We're here for those of you who are watching live. You know this. We're in like the first weeks of school. Both of us work in a college kind of setting. And so that's big. There's business going on. How are things there in Terre Haute?
Doing pretty well. Yeah, today felt a little quieter, which is awesome. We've been really kind of ramping up busy, over the last couple of days. I know you've been feeling that too. And today was kind of nice to just kind of feel a little more normal. So that was, how about you?
Yeah. Probably the same. We had kind of a busy beginning of the week, and stuff is still going on, but kind of we've gotten into the flow. And things are going. So today is my wife's birthday, so I actually took the morning off a little bit, celebrated that with her, and I'm also going to be taking her to dinner tonight. So taking a little break here in the middle to do some Rise of the GM stuff for you guys for her birthday. She could care less, I'm sure.
I want to say hey to Evan and hey to Barry. And Barry said, I'm still avoiding the start of the semester. So
smart.
Kicking it off next week. Yep. Enjoy that when it starts up for sure. So yeah.
Well, we are going to start, as we always do, with an encounter starter, something that you can get your brain firing if you're looking for something to do in your game. And Adam's going to be reading that here today. So Adam, what do we got?
Yeah, this is a fun one. So, looking at, we've talked about these books over the last year a lot. Like this is the Eureka book from Gnome Stew that we still are pulling a lot of our like encounter prompts from. And I like, one of the things I like, and I don't know if we've talked about this ever before, is that they are broken down into like with the NPCs, they're broken down into like villains and neutral people and allies. And those are kind of even in a like different genre kind of feel. You get some of that too, but these have like kind of a theme also that you can, so if like you get a hold of that book, you could even search like, hey, I'm really interested in what today is under the revolt or like rebellion kind of thing. So
I think they have cool. I think they have printed versions of those, and those are probably great, but I have the EPUB or the Kindle. I have it on like Kindle, and it's wonderful because you can jump to the back and look at just like sci-fi scenarios or high fantasy or ones that deal with betrayal. They have them broken down lots of ways, and you just click on it and boom, you're there. You can also like go through chapter by chapter and that kind of stuff. So
it's pretty cool,
really handy.
It is really cool. So I wanted to mention that as I'm looking at this too, but I found this really interesting with the revolt idea. So this one's called To Drown in Power. Excuse me. The PCs are at sea when a behemoth from the depths attacks their ship. It swipes passengers and crew members from the deck, and it swallows them whole. Many people land in the water during this attack and will drown if unaided. The PCs don't have to kill the sea creature. They can drive it off by inflicting enough damage, but regardless of the PC's efforts, the ship starts to sink. The PCs can use a lifeboat to save the crew and passengers from the waters. One of the passengers who they rescue is this pale elf. The elf explains that she has escaped from the underwater kingdom, whose tyrannical ruler sent the sea creature out to capture slaves. The pale elf possesses a magic item that will teleport her back home, along with a small group, and she pleads for help in overthrowing the tyrant. You can offer treasure and glory as needed to entice the PCs to aid the pale elf or fill in the blank on what your characters or players, are kind of driven by in that realm. Following the teleportation back to the place, the PCs awaken in the underwater kingdom, a dimly lit land with odd vegetation similar to seaweed. The pale elf is there, and she explains that a wizard sealed the land in a magical dome to save the people of a sinking island. If the PCs look to the quote sky, they'll see shadows of large whales, squid, and schools of fish. The PCs are attacked by merfolk, or other human sea creature hybrids. The creatures were tracking the pale elf, and they attack using tridents and nets. One of the creatures rides a beast that appears to be part rhino and part great white shark. Allow the PCs to explore the setting to create empathy with the native people. Eventually, the PCs will need to infiltrate the tyrant's fortress. This will lead to a final encounter with the tyrant and his elite guard. The tyrant has a magical orb that he can use to temporarily allow seawater to fall from the dome and crush his opponents. The PCs can use the tyrant's orb to raise the former island back to the surface, or you can devise another adventure centered on the PCs returning home. So that's To Drown in Power.
This one, interesting. It left me with a lot of questions, and I'm just going to kind of start in that area. First of all, one of the things, they said, oh, you can have the sea elf talk about all kinds of things to entice the players to go there. But just before that, it said that the behemoth was sent by this tyrannical leader to get slaves. I think the best way I would use is one of your party members gets swallowed by the great fish, and the fish goes and like basically does a Jonah thing where it spits the people out down there, and they're still alive. They may have to spend 3 days in the belly of the great fish, but they get spit out. And this elf is like, that's how he gets slaves. And so probably your friend is like going to be there. Man, is there any way they would not go there after that? That's just one thing I thought of as I was reading this. But the questions I had were, okay, so he put this orb around this island, right? That was a sinking island. So basically in my mind, he's got this thing now down at the bottom of the sea, and it's like got a dome over it, but it's like air in there, right? So your PCs can breathe and they can see fish. But then all of a sudden it's like you're being attacked by merfolk and stuff. Yes. And I'm like, so do they like kind of pop out of the water and grow legs? And it's like, and they're on these things that are like a shark something hybrid. And I'm like, shark rhino hybrid. Okay. So is it like a shark with the legs of a rhino? Because they're in, and it's like, I was just this whole idea of like, are they in air? Are they in water? Do they freely go between both? Can you enter and exit this thing, even though it's a dome holding the water back? Can people go in and out? So that was my first question as I was trying to like figure this out. And that's as you as a GM. So here's the thing, you as a GM, you get to decide this stuff. You get to make it up. And then if this were mine, I would absolutely have it so that anybody could just be swimming right along, come right up, and then boom, they're on dry land. And so it would have to be these hybrids that like could be in both places. You know how in movies when the mermaid dries her legs or her fin off, it becomes legs. I'm thinking of Splash. If you remember the 80s. I don't know if that happens with all the other mermaid movies. All the other ones being Little Mermaid in my whole lectionary of mermaid movies. But anyway, things that can be both. I think that would be pretty cool, actually. Things that somehow transformed, or they just kind of had appendages for both areas because of the way everything here has evolved. That would be fun to explore a little bit. And that's the way I would play it. But you could, as a GM, you could do that completely different. It could be a impassable barrier, and you could figure out how you're going to deal with that.
Yeah, you put a better spin, because I had those questions. I had some, particularly the like, I thought we were in like air, and now there's merfolk. Like that was like, and like the rhino, which I think actually what you're saying maybe makes that make a lot more sense to me, because I was like, why a rhino and a shark? Like, why can't this guy just be riding a shark? Like, why do we need, and I wonder if it is that situation where.
And how cool would it be? I mean, we're going to be talking about combat as
Right.
our, rolling, that's our main topic for today and how that goes. But how cool would it be to introduce a kind of combat where these things are fighting and then they're maybe getting beat a little bit and they back up to the edge of this dome and they jump and then boom, they're swimming off and coming
Right.
back and coming from different areas and
Yeah, that is
in
cool.
and out. And you as the player don't necessarily have that same transformative ability, but if you get in the water, you got to figure out how to fight in the water and swim stuff and
Yeah, yeah.
speed changes and all that.
That is cool. Yeah, I think that makes some dynamics there that would be interesting and not normal for sure. Like if you had that kind of a wall of water,
Yeah.
that they're like making use of that. Yeah, I like that idea. I definitely I could see this as particularly in like, coming off. It's been a while now, but the coming off of like some nautical travel like sessions that I had, I could see like this being a really cool kind of break up to that where it's not just like, okay, you get on a ship, you sail for a while, but now you're back on land, but like I like to have those things that kind of break it up the travel and make it's my whole like the journey is the thing, kind of deal. And I like those pieces being there. And I feel like this could be a really cool one to like draw somebody into a, no pun intended, a deeper place, with the world, and then be able to, maybe even come up with some clues to the greater story, kind of deal. But I like this encounter. I just like those kind of questions. I think like you're talking about kind of putting your own flavor on what they've talked about would be a super important piece for this, because otherwise it's a little confusing to me.
I also like the idea, and we talk about this all the time, that you make layers. So you're at a lower level, and the layer is there's this tyrant down there who has this orb, but you also just saw this huge Leviathan. And what I would do is that I would make it, that's something you just can't even fathom how you could beat that. I think it's so huge, it's so powerful. Maybe not just mass wise, but there's a magic, there's innate magic to this thing that just almost stuns you with its aura because it's just so powerful. And it goes and deposits slaves and leaves, whatever. You maybe defeat this tyrant, but in doing so, he somehow escapes, whether it's he has like a soul in a soul gem that's with the Leviathan or something. And later in this campaign, you guys, when you get to be, huge, powerful, buff dude, you go and you're going to actually end up fighting this Leviathan and this tyrant again. And this tyrant is like, he knows kind of who you are now, and he's on his full power, because maybe what you saw down in that bubble was just a, an avatar or something, and now he's in his full glory with this great
his
magical
final
fish.
form.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
for sure.
that's fun. That'd be fun.
Yeah. I
And
like
of
that
course,
too.
anytime there's an orb, I like that. It just sounds magical and awesome. So I don't know what all you can
Orbs
do
are
with that
pretty
orb.
cool. Orbs are pretty cool. Yeah, I like that as a my mind with those kind of things goes to a maybe greater intent for the orb than just like the ability to lift this. Not that that's not cool, but like oh yeah, you can lift the island back up or the city back up and out of the water, but maybe there's like something deeper, or it's like this is one of 5 orbs that are scattered about the world that
Or
do
this is
different
like one
things,
thing
or,
this orb can do, but it also has
right.
much greater
Yeah.
obvious powers that you could, one of the person in your
Right.
party could now wield.
Yeah, for sure. Barry said, "Did someone say ships and sailing?"
Oh yeah.
Yeah, love it.
Although we're talking more about ships and sinking
That's true. That's true.
than sailing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good encounter. Good possible start. Think about how you as a GM might, and how would you resolve some of these things about being in this bubble underwater, and anything about the elf to get you there, and how was it a she? I think it was a she. How she could kind of play in and maybe be a recurring character. Again, always take an opportunity to think, these people that have to set up an encounter, they could be NPCs that then become woven into your story. So how could she become woven into the story? How could the tyrant be, someone who is more than just a one-time boss that you knock down? And then all those things you can play with as far as like exploring underground, and that they can all be one time if you want, the Rhino Shark Rider. He's probably not going to be around a lot, but you never know. Could always have that Rhino Shark Rider just come back again and again. And really the way to determine that as a GM is, where do your characters like somehow just get this natural affinity for
Right.
somebody? And if so,
Do they react?
keep that one in your mind, because that guy could come back again and again and again.
We're having a conversation. This brings this up for me too. Like, I feel like if you're in this place where maybe you've like helped overthrow a tyrant, there's also, I don't know. I guess it depends on the story again that you're telling, but like that may be the rest of the peoples. It talks in that encounter. It talks about getting to know people, and it helps you like have that idea of like, oh, this person is an actual tyrant. The people are oppressed. These people are gonna maybe uprise in the midst of that too. So like, what's it look like to play out that aspect? Also, I mean, you're highlighting like this is what the heroes or the PCs are doing, but that's a part of it too. But then the part that I was actually thinking about when I started this was I really like the idea of like creating allies as you go through a campaign. And I think that's from my beginnings of the very first campaign we were in. I like, I was actually telling this to Evan and Eric on Monday when we were talking, but I still have like notes from that game, like a book that I was writing in to like keep notes. And there's like a list of our allies, because in my brain my character was like, who can we like gather in this alliance to take on like what's going on in the world that's like wrong across the world kind of deal. And I think about that in this kind of realm too. It's like, okay, you've helped overthrow, but maybe later on when it's about like, I don't know, war has come to the upper lands. It's like, maybe we can call on them to help us now because they've experienced like our help kind of thing. So I think about that in terms of a player a lot. And I don't want to ever like architect that as a DM, because it's like, that may not be what, like in the Jade Masks, that may not be what the party wants. They might not want to be like collecting all these people to try to help them. But as a player, I'm often like thinking in those terms kind of thing too. So.
And it doesn't have to, the danger we always have is you get all these NPCs that are helpers, and they become, it's like your party grows exponentially because you have all these people that you have to then like, so you might, again, with that, whoever the players resonate with, think about other ways you can incorporate them. So a couple examples here. We had, I think it was the Dormant Mine. Yeah, Dormant Mine. They were on an airship, and there was a big fight with a ballista shooting on the ship and other stuff. And they killed a whole bunch of people real fast. And this one dude on the ship like got knocked down to like 1 hit point or something like that. And he fell down on the ground and just pretended to be dead. But this ship is listing from side to side in the air. Right. He keeps sliding from one side of the boat to the other and just hitting. And he's like playing dead the whole time. And, none of them actually knew he was alive, but metagame, they all knew that there was this dude like with 1 hit point just sliding around pretending to be dead. And that's a kind of thing that like, they could lose track of him as the battle goes on, and he could pop up later and be like this dude who just remembers and went and told other people and whatever. Yeah, so that's like a bad example. But here's another example. In that same game, I think, on an actual sea, not up in the air, they were on another ship. I don't know how I think it's because I'm thinking about ships, but they were on another ship, and there were these, was it harpies or rocks? There was like something coming
harpies,
after.
Hippos and
yeah, there were huge hippos hitting the ship. There was a hydra out there, and then there were these flying harpies or whatever. And I mean, they're doing all they can. And I think it was, I don't remember which character. One of the characters did like a ton of damage to one of the main harpy that's up there, like the queen fighting everybody. And then right at the last second, one of the NPCs puts his bow up in the air and shoots, and happens to roll a 20. And the thing only had like 1 hit point left, or like very few hit points left. And so like this NPC that was like not even supposed to be in the story points his bow up, shoots, and knocks the main harpy out of the sky with 1 shot. And so everybody starts like telling these tales about this great archer, this warrior. He was somebody's brother.
Yeah, it's somebody's brother. Yeah,
we made it into somebody's brother
or something.
And then for like the rest of like occasionally they would meet this guy again as they were adventuring, and he would come in, and every time he would come in, the people around would kind of almost not even recognize the PCs there, but they're like, have you seen Bob's brother? Bob's brother's here. And like 2 different times he like rolled a 20 and did something amazing.
Yep.
And so like I basically kept bringing him back as this person that like, it's almost like the NPCs are like, are you kidding me? That guy's back again, and he's going to steal one of our kills and get all the glory again.
As players, we loved it.
They loved it.
It was like, yes.
So you can always bring people back like that. Then you don't have this whole party of people that are just that you have to run as players, but they can like kind of weave in and out of your story in other aspects too. So again, watch for whoever resonates with your players, because that's how both of those characters came to be remembered. They were ones that the characters just loved to talk about and remember. And so brought them back.
Totally.
So there you go.
Yeah.
All that off of that encounter. That kind of leads us into a little bit what we're talking about today, and that is the whole combat part. What happens in combat, and how do you handle combat as the game master? This is one of those parts that, like, I think everybody who's a GM thinks about, and they may feel like, I know how that goes.
Right.
And yet a lot of people are like, man, I don't feel like I'm very good at that, or I feel like I could be better at that, or how exactly do you do that well?
Right.
Because there are things to consider. Like I said, this is one of those 3 major pillars. Combat is going to be in whatever RPG you're playing. I started to say D&D, but I don't care if you're Red Markets. I don't care if you're, Upwind, if you're Ironsworn, you're going to be fighting sometimes. And, how you take care of that matters. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So Adam, why don't you kick us off? I always love to let Adam kick us off, and then I steal the platform and just talk for like 30 minutes straight. And he's like, shut up.
I just philosophize for a while. I think what you just said, like, is a good, like, intro into that. Like, I really liked when you talked about the pillars last week, about just, that the exploration and those role playing and combat, like, I think are the 3, kind of, not that there's not other
there
pieces,
may be more. That was just the first 3 that came.
I think
to
major
mind.
though, at least how I would run things. But and I think combat, I kind of generalizing here, and there's probably people out there that are like, no, I never even do combat. But like, I think probably across the board, that's, I'm just going to say, like, probably the biggest pillar, like, typically, or at least like when I think of role-playing games, or like if it's portrayed on a TV show, what are they doing? They've got the Demigorgon out there with their miniatures and the rolling dice. And like, that's typically what I think people are going to think about, even though there are major pieces. And I'm assuming that's like, my history is not the greatest, and I think that could get better. But I would guess, like, coming from wargaming, like, that's going to be a piece of that too, of like, combat is in that. Like, just that's held throughout the part of it. It's also, I think, in a lot of ways, the most like tangible piece of that, where it's like, there is a very specific set of rules, and probably the most rule set mechanics, like, this is how this works. It's going to be written in a book, or at least our like bigger D&D, Pathfinder, things like that, where it's like, how much ink is spilled on how combat works and the mechanics of how a character plays out in combat and those kind of things. So I think like that tends to be the big one. This does, and like you said, I think we tend to be like, oh yeah, we kind of understand, and it's very mechanically plotted out. But I think there's a lot to like think through that's even beyond just like what we read in the book, about that too. So it's worth talking about today. And I don't know, did you have any like immediate thoughts, like, as far as jumping in about, like, I know you do.
I do. It's one of those things that I think sometimes people who are GMing think, okay, well, combat is going to happen, and the rules will walk us through that. But the truth is, combat is something that you need to learn to manage. You can get into games where people just follow the rules, and they're, you roll the dice, this happens, this happens, this happens. And we're going through initiative, but it can really kind of mire down into this, this just swamp of numbers and minutia if you're not careful. Yeah. And so as the GM, your job is to do a couple things. One is to make sure the pace is good and that it moves, because you don't want to get so bogged down. Secondly, you want to make sure that you are the one controlling it. And I'm going to come back to this again and again. But one thing that is particularly I've seen new GMs get really tripped up in this is the idea that you ask a player, what do you do? And the player then grabs ownership and tells you what they do. And one of the things that I, as a GM, and this is not necessarily maybe everybody, but me, I believe that players do not decide what happens. Players declare intent in their turns. Yeah. And too often I'll see, a GM say to a player, it's like, okay, what are you going to do? And they're like, okay, I go up and I smack the big bad under the chin. And when his head flies back, I then smack him on the right side and he smashes into this light. And then when that happens, I'm going to stick this in, and basically they're dictating what happens, and they roll and they're like, okay, so I got a 20 with that. That's, a crit. And so the damage is 47, Okay, well, that's all fine and dandy. But what they did was they just said, this is what I'm doing. And that's not the way I like to roll. The way I roll is I say, what is it you're trying to do? What's your intent? And they'll tell me their intent. And that may happen or it may not, but I'm the one telling the story. And they may say, I'm going to go up and try and, do an uppercut under this thing. And and then, and I'm like, okay, well, let's roll to see if that happens. Okay. Just as you go to strike, and that's an 18, that's pretty good. But what you didn't see was blah, blah, blah. Or he pulls back, he jumps back and, this thing flies up in front of him, or what, I don't know what I would change necessarily, but I have, I'm going to let them hit when they hit, but I'm not going to let them necessarily take the story away from me, because I know the whole story and they just know they want to be awesome.
Yeah.
Being awesome is great. And I want them to be awesome too. That's part of my role as a GM. So anyway, you want to keep it fast. You want to have ownership of it. And then the last part is you want this to be so clear story wise. So this is just kind of all my preamble into what I'm actually going to kind of throw out as how to do good combat stuff. But I think the whole thing is that people know that we have maps. They know that we have minis and we have dice. And I'm one of those people, you talk about the 8 types of fun. Those are some of the things I love. Right. You have to remember that those things are all just visual aids. Okay. Those aren't the game. And if you let people start to just play, basically they just reach forward and they move their thing and then they roll their dice and then you resolve it and that's it. Really what you've done is you've turned it into a board game. And, some people like that to varying degrees. Yeah. But don't underestimate the power of narration in a combat. And I think it's a really good idea, a good practice to sometimes, maybe, I don't know if I'd say once a session, but occasionally try and do a combat where you don't even use maps or minis or anything. If you can't clearly explain it so that people know where they are and what is happening in a scene, you might need to sharpen that skill. And so that clarity of being able to describe a scene and describe what is happening without relying too heavily on your visual aids will be something that benefits you greatly when you go to run run combat. So
Yeah.
that's all kind of what we as the GM want to do. And I think that there are certain ways. And so an article I read a long time ago that I kind of took to heart, and one that I kind of made my, not my pillar. That's the word we've been using too much. But I made a kind of a mainstay of how I run combat. It was by, you've heard of the Angry GM, right?
Yeah.
And so some of our listeners probably have heard of this too. He wrote an article about combat, and I borrowed so heavily from it. A lot of what I'm doing here today is summarizing kind of what he had in his article. But like, it was the whole, you're going to declare, determine, and describe. That's what you do as a GM. And those are, well, that's what happens in combat. So the party will declare what it is they're trying to do. And again, before they begin resolving it, I like to have them declare. Now, sometimes that doesn't always work out. Sometimes they're going to like, I want to do this, and you're like, okay, so how do you do that first part? They do it, and there's a roll, and then you're going to describe how that plays out, and then they move on to, because let's face it, some of our players have so many stinking actions. I'm thinking of Ozoff. In our game right now, guys, like I got 27 attacks, and I can move, and I can do 7 luckies, in case, depending on. And so like, you can't just have him declare, this is what I'm going to do, and then, okay, now we resolve it. He has to, he starts, you resolve, he continues, you resolve. And so sometimes it'll happen like that. It might be a string of declarations and resolving, but there's that declare step where you have them declare, this is what I want to do. This is my intention. And then there is the determination. And I think this is probably the easiest step, because determining is what all those rules that we talk about all the time. That's what they're all about. Somebody says, I want to hit him with this. And so they roll against this, and you factor in this condition, and boom. And that should really, I know when people are first starting, this is the phase that they're like worried about. It's like, okay, am I going to remember everything that's got, what their armor bonuses are, and, his condition causes this, and there's this magic thing that's, aiding in this way. But you get to where you can handle that stuff. But then I think that the meat of it as a GM is describing that thing, right? And I think until you describe it narratively, it didn't really happen fully yet. Because if you just, and you may be thinking, well, what's there to describe? He came in, he rolled an 18, which hits, and he said he did 7 damage. That describes it right there, right? Well, if you do that, it's going to be one of those games where everybody is bored, and where it feels like you're just kind of going through the motions, and it's taking a long time. When you describe well, yes, if you describe well, that may take a little extra time, but it's going to make it feel subjectively faster, like the pace is faster in your game. And so I think learning to describe exactly how things happen when someone has declared an intent, and then rolled to determine how that happens, or if it in fact happens. It's not complete until you describe it. I mean, even moving across the battlefield is an action that can be described. You talk about how you're running as things are flying past you, and you step in some slime that's been put there, and you barely keep from slipping as you throw out, and then you're describing. And the best way to get good at that is to do it a lot, to think like a movie, and be sure to describe. But
help that visualization happen. I'm sorry I cut you off there, but I like a lot I actually think through and kind of question a lot of times the like which happens first. And I like what you're saying here, because it's like the intent, the role, and then like actually describing, because sometimes, like, I was thinking about this with the social encounters and never really spit it out last week, but it's like, well, do you make your case in role play and then roll, or do you roll and then make your case based on what you know it to be, kind of thing. And I think you can go either way for sure, but I think with the combat thing too, that's a good way to think. And even looking back at the social thing, maybe there's some wisdom in that as well, of like, if I'm talking to the guy that needs to let me into the mayor, I need to say like, okay, GM, my intent is that I'm going to persuade this guy to get me past. And then maybe even in that case, okay, it's like, go ahead and make your persuasion roll, and then we can talk it out. When I see that I rolled a 7 and there's no way that he's going to let me pass, then I can flub my. And I think that in the same, like what you're talking about with the combat, which is what our stuff is today. I do like that because I don't know. I've done it before where it's like, I jump up here and slash this guy, and like I'm trying to explain and like get into it and all this stuff, and it's like, and I roll a 2. So I trip on my face and I just stab myself to death, and like,
To death.
like I'm done. So, I think like that is a good order of that, of especially so it's just not like deflating, as a PC, that's deflating when you're like, I'm awesome. No, I'm not, because the dice don't like me today. But then I think it helps with that storytelling too, because now we're not having to like erase all that from our memory and then go forward with like what it went. I do like the pacing. I think I'm going to talk about pace a little more here in a second, but the way description does help. It's that, well, getting into pacing, nothing kills a game for me more than when we're just like, I guess I'm sitting here for 4 hours and I'm going to roll twice, kind of thing. Like it's like, sometimes I've been in those games. Like we've probably all been in those games. I've run those games, where it's like, why is combat so slow tonight? And I do think like some of that descriptive stuff of like just flavoring it does help. Even we need to speed it up regardless, and pace needs to be dealt with. But like, even in those times when it's like, okay, combat, probably one of the reasons we talk about combat and think about it as like a majority piece of D&D is like, it just takes a long time. If like, I know if we have a combat tonight at the table, probably half of our time is going to be that, kind of deal. That's just kind of how it works, unless I make it short,
But when you make it memorable,
exactly,
it's like time stretching or compressing, and that even though it took a long time, people look back at it as a fast action thing that they remember, and they can talk about it, and it doesn't seem like the slog, right?
Yeah. And I think like to like to do our best to engage the group during that, even when I'm not being very linear today, so sorry for that, but like the engaging the group even, in that. So it's like person A went, and now we're going through the list and it's been a while. Like, one, I think like it's worthwhile in our enemy, initiatives. And there is some debate, and I'd like to hear you in this too, Matthew, of like, some people like to do different initiatives for their creatures. Like say we're fighting 3 goblins and an ogre, kind of thing. Like sometimes there's this option to like, all those enemies are on the same initiative. Sometimes it's like, well, the goblins are on an initiative, the ogres on an initiative, or all of them get their own initiative, kind of thing. And I think there's some argument for all of those ways. I tend to fall in, I like groups. So it's like all the goblins are going to go together. The ogre is going to go together. And I think that gives a little bit of space for why I choose that. One, it's like to take a little bit of pressure off of me as running the enemies. I don't have to do it all at once if I have multiple layers of enemies. Part of it's for the sake of the players, of they don't have to sit here and listen to me roll dice, and that's a thing where I would even, this doesn't happen typically, but I may even like, I would probably fudge an initiative just to not have the ogre and the goblins go back to back, just so that there's space for the pacing of the game, kind of thing. Like bump them down one so that a player can go between that. That's just me. People might not like that, but that's the way. I think like allowing that. But what that also does is it gives you some chance to spread out the action also, where it's like, okay, the ogre is attacking Ozoff here, and they're going to interact, and he may not be the one doing things, but he's having things like he's having to react to, and there may be some even action economy that happens because of reactions, and or whatever. If we're in red markets, maybe you get a chance to use your Twitch to defend, kind of deal, or that kind of thing. But then now it's somebody else's turn, and now you're back here, and you can kind of spread out those attacks or effects or things like that. So I think like that kind of pacing stuff is important to me to like move. It's that spotlight thing again, but it's in a different way than just like the RP part. But I cut you off in the middle of your stuff too, so just want to.
No, I just want to actually speak to what you're talking about, this idea of pacing. I think there's a few things you can do to really make pacing work better. And you touched on a big one right there, and that is I don't think you should have all the baddies at once, right? Because like you said, okay, each of you take a turn, and then I'm going to take 12 turns in a row. I'm just going to say I'm going to do 12. It's like boring, but again, you also don't want to spread those out so much that everybody's on their own initiative. It gets unwieldy. So groups, I think you're right. The group of kobolds over here, and then you got the goblins who run in it, but then you got the one hobgoblin who is a shaman. He's obviously more important. He gets his own thing, and that's going to affect everything. Spread those out. But I think a big thing that we don't think about enough as a GM is we can help that pacing by transitions. Transitions are hugely important. If you get good at transitions, you're gonna make a battle feel so much better. And a great way to do that is a combining, right? So we talked about declare, what was it? Determine and then describe. So they declare their intent. We determine what's going to happen. But then the description part, that's where you describe it, but then you combine that with inviting the next player to go. Right. So you don't like get done with one player, describe all that, and then be like, okay, Chris, what do you do? And then Chris is like the dreaded, let's see. I think, let me look at my spell list here, and then it just dies. And so what you do is in your description, you bring it in. So you're like, okay, Nightclaw jumps up and scratches 5 people, and then like does this force push that blasts everybody back. And while Ragnar's standing there, he feels this force hit him as 2 bodies go flying past, and he squares up on the guy he's with and does what? Ragnar, so you bring that description.
How do you respond to this?
Invite the next person to already be in the action, and you don't want to declare what their action is going to be. I don't want to say that, but take that to combine, kind of moving to the next person. Bella over there, Bella standing with her arms raised and power flying out of her, and just as this happens, the healer notices that 2 players are down, but he's being targeted by the huge thing. What do you do, healer? And then
I like that, and that's something I feel like, not exactly in those words, but it's something I think I've seen more in the way that the Sentinel Comics RPG flows with the initiative order. I'm doing quotes for you listening out there, and for initiative, that idea, because the initiative, we talked about this before, but it passes. It's like, my hero does something, and then they're like, well, who are you going to pass to? And I'm like, well, I'm going to pass it to the Blade Battalion guy, to let him make his move. But I think from a GM standpoint, that's real what you're saying. I've really liked in that game, and I like that idea to try to bring that over, because it's like, the the giant stone creature slams Legacy in the face, with a thunderous punch, and then all right, Legacy, whoever's playing Legacy, like how do you respond to this kind of thing? And then that definitely puts them in that action, and I really do like that when it's like what you're saying in like a Pathfinder game, even if they're not even the direct recipient of an attack, but even that like side, like uh this person gets scorching raid by the wizard, but the person who's next is near them. It's like you feel the heat of this spell kind of burn you too. No HP damage, but like you feel that heat on you. How do you get? How do you respond? I like that, and I'm just kind of hand that back to you, Matthew. There.
Yeah, we've got a train coming through there in Terre Haute, for those of you listening. But the last thing I would say about pacing that I think is important as you're running a combat is the concept of speed chess. If any of you out there play chess, you know what speed chess is. Speed chess is where you have like 3 to 5 minutes. Or I guess you could have up to 10 minutes for an entire game per side. So your timer starts and stops. The reason I'm saying it's like this concept is nobody plays speed chess well if you don't know exactly what your players do. You have to know how the knight moves. You have to know how the bishop moves. You have to know the rules of movement and stuff like that in order to do it quickly and well. And that means you're not going to think through everything that could happen. You're going to see quickly and you're going to make a quick decision because you know what the bishop does. You know what the knight does. Well, it's the same thing with DMing. You have to know the stat blocks of your monsters. If you're a person who just like, you know what, I know I'm going to have some of these in there, and then you get in and you're not really sure what their stat blocks are, what their special powers are, what they do, you're going to run a really slow, long, prodding slog of a combat because you're going to be reading a lot. It's going to be no good. Go through, as a GM, you should do a little pre-game work. Okay, I know I talk a lot about flying by the seat of my pants and just coming up with stuff, and that's good. But for your monsters, you should know the basics of what they do. And so I like to either, if I'm printing out, I do it with a highlighter in hand. If I'm on a computer, I still can like highlight on the computer, and I'll highlight the things that I think are the big ways this guy fights. Okay. Aura, I'll put that because that's important for me to remember. He has this spell that like shoots, 120, feet of line damage on somebody. I'll highlight that. And then, he has this thing he does that makes him grow and bulk in size. And then he can, I'll highlight that. And then, so when I'm in the midst of my battle, I can quickly decide, okay, this is what he should do in this situation. This is what he should do in this situation. I don't have it all mapped out. I'm not going to sit down and think of what, it's like playing classic chess versus speed chess. I'm not going to sit down and, decide, look through everything they can do and pick the most advantageous thing at that time. I'm going to know, here's what would probably be best in this situation. And is it always ideal? No, but it's sometimes, it means I'm going to unload his big thing early because this is an opportune time. And I think, again, if you want to keep a battle paced well and move fast, you need to know what your monsters and stuff can do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like we talked about with the better player practices back when. It's like, hey, know your character. It's like number one, come to the table and know like specifically what you do, what you can, that helps, in that kind of pacing from the player side of thing. And it's the same way. I feel it the hardest when I'm like not always completely sure, and I'm just like, I'm so sorry, people. I'm so sorry, guys. Like, it's like I'm feeling that if I don't feel like, okay, I had a good grasp, on this, but I really like, and I don't think it's like, this is probably not super new information to people, but the monsters know what they're doing, like, is a really good resource. If you haven't ever used that before, I think I may have shared that on our Instagram at some point, but the Monsters Know What They're Doing is like a strategy for a creature kind of write up, like blog slash web book, kind of deal. And so if you're like, hey, tonight I'm using a beholder, I don't really know what to do. That's a lot of eyes. There's a lot of spells, and like you could go search Monsters Know What They're Doing beholder, and they give a rundown of like, hey, this is kind of based on what the book says about them, like how they would respond, and here's some good ways to strategize. And I found that to be a really cool piece, especially if there's like, okay, this whole thing has been leading up to them facing off with the dragon and its lair, like here's a good way to make use of that kind of thing. So that's a good option in that kind of realm too, to help, if you have a little of that extra prep time, that you want to put in and hopefully should be putting into it. That's a good option for that too.
The last thing I'll say on pacing that you just reminded me of, it was this idea the monsters know what they're doing. So I talked about this: declare, determine, describe, right? You declare the intent, you determine if it's successful or not successful, and then you describe how it goes. That's for players. So NPCs are going to come up too, and you're going to play those, but NPCs do not need to declare their intent. You already know as the DM what their intent is. And so the whole thing is you describe it and then roll dice to see if it happens, or roll the, kind of say, maybe you roll the dice first and then describe it, but you don't need to declare the intent. And that will keep it moving faster to be able to just describe then what happened as they came up to, attack and bite and slam and whatever they're going to do.
Yeah. And I'm more into, and this is, I guess, more of a 5e thing. I don't know if I've seen this in all the other stuff, but like, a lot of times, like they'll have like an average damage on like monsters, kind of thing. And those kind of realms, if there's like an NPC involved, I'm more apt to even just go with the parenthesis to average damage and not worry about even rolling at that point for the speed of things, or be like, okay, hey, this is happening over here, especially if it's like an NPC's fighting a goblin over here in the corner, but everybody else is doing stuff over here. I'm going to be like, they scrapple a little bit over here. I'm going to resolve that kind of off to the side and let you know. Next character up, hey, let's see what you're doing. And like, meanwhile, while they're kind of telling their intent, I'm over here like, okay, he did connect. He did 5 damage. The knight with you swipes across and cuts across the chest of this goblin with his great sword. All right, so what do you like? What are you doing now here, kind of thing? So I get into that. I think Evan has there's a lot in the chat here I want to kind of point back to briefly, but Evan brought up this idea of once combat enters the quote cleanup phase, I prefer to give the players their victory by having remaining enemies flee or surrender, or let players describe a cleanup montage. And he went on to say he plays in 2-hour sessions, so saving a round or two really does mean a difference. And I think that's a really good, because that's the worst when you're like, this obviously is going to be a victory. There are 5 of us and 1 goblin, but for some reason none of us can roll over a 9. It's like, what is going on? Like, let's move on, kind of thing. And the goblin is not going to fight to the death, or they can just say, so I think that's a really good point, Evan, for us to make use of when we're in those places of like, this is an obvious outcome. Do we need to sit here for another 45 minutes to make sure it happens by the rolls, or can we like narrate this kind of thing? I do like that victory in that way, or just like a surrender, kind of thing is important.
Yeah. The last kind of main thing, and maybe it's not the last thing we talk about today, but the last main thing I took away when I said, I had read this article by the Angry GM a long time ago. Last thing I took away from that was the idea of telegraphing. It's this idea that you don't, so in a video game, like there are animations that telegraph certain things are about to happen. When the wizard, raises the staff up really high and hits down, that a certain kind of attack is going to happen. That's different from when they, swing, whatever like that. as a GM, you want to telegraph certain things so that your players don't just sit there and I get into this habit of like, I just spam one move over and over because it's the best move my character has. You know, I'm like, shoot, Eldritch Blast, Eldritch Blast, Eldritch Blast, Eldritch Blast. But like, when you can begin to let things be telegraphed, it can make the combat more varied. So first of all, I think it's important to telegraph. It's the idea of narration over numbers. So one thing that I think you should not do as a GM is just meta tell your players things like, so they're resistant to piercing, blah, 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 because then it takes a lot of the fun of like figuring out how battle is going to happen out of it. And they're just like, oh, okay, put away all your piercing stuff, get out your, and that whole meta thing. And so I think whatever it is that you're doing in combat, you can narrate, it's like your arrow goes up and just seems to bounce off the skin of this thing as it seems to resist swords and just crash through the wall and blah, 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 whatever. Then they have to think, okay, is it resistant to piercing? Is it just resistant to melee? Is it resistant to physical damage, but not they don't know. That opens up and they have to like experiment. And I think that's good. But so you don't want to remove the job of figuring it out because I think that's a really fun part. But you do want to telegraph the three things he talked about there. You want to telegraph stats, you want to telegraph status, and you want to telegraph strategy. So you want to telegraph stats. Everything that is in a monster's stat block can be telegraphed through narration. Okay. So whether that's you're looking at, and not even just the stuff that is so their ability, agility or strength, if something's really strong, it's just instead of saying, this, huge, this monster with a lot of strength comes at you, you can say, as these rippling muscles begin to like bulge on this thing and the veins start to stick out and his eyes go crazy, you can talk about strength that way. You can talk about like things like berserker skills or magical enhancements by not just saying it's like he does a magical enhancement and suddenly he's stronger. You can say, narrate that. He begins to like glow as his body bulges and it's like places you didn't think muscles could be begin to pop out. And again, you're letting them know something is changing. Something is about to happen here. And you can go through like basically almost any stat that's in a stat block and figure out a way to narrate that instead of just telling people that. So that's one thing you can telegraph. A second thing is the status. That's how this thing is doing. And I do think that makes a difference in how players play. If you're just like, he's hitting, he's booming, boom. Oh, you kill him.
Right. Yeah.
That's okay, but that's not as satisfying. And you don't know how strong are they. So you just keep doing that Eldritch Blast over and over. But like, if you're like, you can see he's slowing down as his eyes begin to unfocus and sweat pours over his body, blah, blah, blah. And you can even get to a place where it's like, he seems to be like dragging a leg and, it's almost as if he can't stand, but he's like still trying to, you get that sense. That's what the whole, what was that? Bloodied? Was that in Bloodied, 4? Yeah, the whole Bloodied, and there was another one.
Started doing that. Yeah,
there was Bloodied and
Decimated.
Decimated. Yeah. Those things came in to like let you know, hey, this thing, maybe I want to just give it the everything I got because I think it's on its last legs, and it changes the way they fight. So instead of just like doing, or like if a thing begins to like, you're like, the mage grabs both hands around this staff and suddenly he begins to swell as this emanation starts to go out.
Right.
Energy pulls in and everything takes a green cast as he begins to mumble some words. They all realize, okay, something is about to happen. And I wouldn't do this directly on his turn. I would do this before. That's
Yeah,
why
yeah,
it's
yeah.
called telegraphing, because
Right.
you can say, as the fight's happening, you notice that the large guy has grabbed the staff with both hands. The light has dimmed as a green thing starts to fade around him. They
Right.
can then take an action
Hmm.
to do something defensively. They might be
Yeah.
like, oh man, he's getting ready to blast something. I
Hmm.
better be careful. Or maybe I'm going to try and break his concentration, or whatever it is. It gives them a chance to do an action
Right.
based on, instead of just like, here's this thing. And so telegraphing
Yeah, yeah,
status.
yeah. For sure.
And then I think the last one, telegraphing strategy. And this
Mm.
all came to mind partially because of what Evan said there about like the end. To say something like, one of your players just decimates this hobgoblin. There's a hobgoblin and a bunch of goblins. So
Right.
as the hobgoblin flies across the room, smashes into the wall, and falls to the floor lifeless, you notice like the looks of all the goblins as they begin to look at one another,
Yeah.
slowly stepping back. And it's
Right.
like that's all you have to say, and then they can realize these things are about to flee, and then you
Hmm.
can let them flee, or
Yeah.
you can
Right.
do
Right.
something to keep them from fleeing, or you can like kind of enter that cleanup phase, or
Yeah.
however you want to. But again, you kind of telegraph the strategy here of these goblins once they see the hobgoblin go down. You can do the same with like other sorts of beasts and stuff, but like
Yeah.
being able to like let them know a little bit about what's going on changes the way the players play, and
Absolutely.
makes it
Yeah.
more interesting. So I think
Yeah.
that's an important part too, as you're being the GM.
Right. Yeah. I like that telegraphing, particularly like the off of their turn, the wizard raises his staff like he's about to slam it into the ground. Okay, what do you got? It's like that's not the move for the wizard, but it's like letting them know
And that's
something's
part of
coming.
that transition,
Yeah, yeah. Right.
phase we were talking about. It's like just before it's like, say, Kyrus's turn, like
Yeah, yeah. Right.
the wizard grabs his staff and begins to like glow green as he cocks his arms back.
Yeah.
But Kyrus knows that it's up to him. And what do you do,
Right.
Kyrus?
Yeah. I really like, and I don't do this all the time. And it's typically more of a, I don't know if I wouldn't call it necessarily like a layer action to use like a 5e term, but I like when you're in like a little more, what would you call it? Like a battle, a combat that is a little more high stakes, for there to be a thing that's causing problems but could be disabled. And it's so like one that's I made a yeah, the free um adventure module that we like put out, that like
Mhm.
that at the end, spoilers, but like at the end there's the room you're in, there is a basically it's an orb on a stand that shoots magic missile at you. It's just like this is kind of a petty thing, but also this could get real bad if combat goes a while and people are just getting smacked by this thing for free over and over and over again. And so, the goal is like, okay, that's, well, not the goal, but that's an option for the party. Could be like somebody from the party is like, I'm going to go deal with that and I'm going to smash that thing, or, disable device, or I'm going to burn a dispel magic on it, or like whatever you need to do. But that's like another thing for a character to do. And I think that's like a cool piece of combat too, is like, what are some like extra things that maybe not just like I stand here and swing my sword at the hobgoblin or I cast my magic, but okay, this is a thing that's going on over here. The water is about to burst through the crack in the globe thing that we're fighting under.
Mhm.
Maybe I need to go, like, the strong guy needs to go hold it up, like make sure it doesn't burst while the battle's going on, or like whatever that is. Like there's more pieces. I think that's an important thing, but the whole point being like that feels in the same realm to me as the kind of thing where it's like you're telegraphing the action, because it's like I can stop this, I can interrupt this kind of thing. And I don't know, maybe that's just a me as a player kind of thing, but I love the idea of, I love reactions, I love interrupting, I love like stopping something before it happens. Like I always want, man, if I could just like do that as a character, kind of somehow like have a skill set like to do that, that would be a really cool kind of piece. Rob's saying like environment interactions. Like I think that's cool. And for me, that kind of telegraphing definitely fits into that piece too, of like allowing people to interact in different ways and know what's going on. So yeah, that kind of came up when you were talking to for me.
Yeah, one part that I probably didn't think about enough before today to have like a solid thought on it is it's probably important to know how you're going to transition into combat and how you're going to transition out of combat so that those two things aren't weird. We've kind of been talking here, or the people in our chat have been talking about like different ways that the cleanup phase or the end of the battle can happen and how that goes back to the role playing and social parts of the game out of combat. Because it can be really weird to like be standing around for a long time. And as a GM, you're like, so are you still fighting things, or are you kind of done fighting things now? Or, it's helpful if you as the GM can make a good clean break of like, this is where the end of combat happens. And now, or this is where you're in social interactions, but then boom, all of a sudden, one of the classic and easy ways to get into combat is roll initiative. But that has to happen because something happened in your game. So like I said, I didn't really put enough good thought into it. I'm just kind of thinking right now, it's good to know how you're going to go into combat and how you're going to come out of combat.
Yeah. I do think even though it's meta, like there's something like that feels right about roll initiative to me. Like, it's like, and I do think you said something causes that. Like it's either, okay, there's a confrontation and a player says, I shoot magic missile into the darkness. And you're like, okay, let's resolve
Roll
that.
initiative.
Go ahead and roll initiative because now we're obviously in action and things are going to get hostile. Or the vice versa, where the creature or the NPC or whoever it is that you're fighting, they start the action. It's like,
right.
The crazed barbarian leaps off the cliff with his double bladed axe and comes flying down on top of you. As he does, everybody ready yourselves, roll initiative. Like that. I think that transition, is good. And for the end, I like to have a little bit of narration of, as things go quiet, like the battle seems to be over, as you catch your breath and wipe the sweat from your brow. How do you respond to what's going on around you? Like, I think some of those kind of things, I don't know that I do the best at it, but I try to do that piece also with just like the ending, of the thing.
Yeah. And I think a skill that you have to kind of work at, I don't know where this would fit in the whole conversation we're having today, but it's this idea that you want to, as much as you can, let players know what's going on and to do it with narrative. And so there's the old adage, every time you open your mouth, think, what can I reveal? Whether it's about a monster, whether it's about a situation, whether it's about an environment, whether it's, and it's not that you're going to do that every single time, but like as things are moving and statuses are changing and the fight unfolds, be thinking of how you can narratively fill people in on those things.
Right. Yeah, totally. I kind of have a thought on just like walking through combat for a second, Matthew. And like, if you want to interrupt at any point,
sure,
feel free to do that. But maybe just like, like if I'm thinking kind of practically jumping into combat, maybe somebody's not run one before or that kind of thing. For me, like the way it kind of looks typically is, so something has caused something to be hostile. Like the obstacle is fortunately or unfortunately gonna require violence for some time, like just to be like fully honest, like that's what's going on. And whether that's martial combat or magical or whatever it be, it doesn't have to be fatal necessarily. But it seems like battle is the way that this obstacle is going to be overcome or a conflict is going to be resolved, at least for a time. And so we kind of talked about the initiative aspect there. this is like a moment where things start. So however you transition people in, you're going to ask for an initiative. I have found myself, and I don't know that like, I'm not sure that Matt Mercer made this, but I've seen him do it, and I like it. Of the idea of, I used to kind of just be like, all right, so what's everybody, and I'm like writing numbers down and trying to shimmy things and stuff. And I've really liked his thing of like, is anyone over 20, 23? Okay, cool. Is anybody 15 to 20? Like, I don't know who coined that originally, but that's helped me to organize, even just not be doing initiative for 10 minutes, kind of thing, but to get it done really quick. Get people going. And we've talked about this before, but I definitely like the, okay, Matthew, you're up. Like, what's it look like as Eliakim does this? Hey, by the way, Ozoff, you're next, and Pip, you're going to be after that. And like letting people, I don't do that, I don't think constantly, but there is like every so often, I'm just going to let people know, hey, you're on deck. So just be thinking about the spells or like where you're going to move or that kind of thing. And to continue to go through. And we've talked a lot about the, like, kind of in the midst of things, keeping pace going, moving the spotlight around, describing, taking intention, figuring out how it resolves, like all that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of the way I get it going, I guess. But it's really important to me just knowing how those things function that are going to be a piece of the battle. And you've talked about this before, and I think you do a really good job of it, of like just the environment around you in the combat being its own character that's being managed in that too, of like whether it's rocks that are crumbling or a giant axe that's swinging back and forth in the middle of the thing, which was awesome, or you're on the side of a cliff, or like whatever that is. I think those pieces are really nice to like be a part of that combat too, and not just think of it in terms of players, enemies, but what's around them, and are there maybe even some third parties that are a piece of that, and being able to manage that. Yeah. So I just want to talk a little bit about that kind of practical mindset, getting it going kind of thing too.
Yeah. So there's a ton to talk about with combat.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we will continue to hit on, you could talk for a while on just, initiative stuff. How do you do initiative? Do you do a tracker? Do you just write it on the table on a piece of paper? Do you have people write it in front of themselves? And there's a whole bunch of ways, but like the basics are, you need to get that situation going and then have people declare what their intent is, determine how everything resolves, and then describe it well. Yep. And if you can do that while kind of telegraphing stuff, so it's all in narration and it's not just like metagaming, all the better. It's something that takes practice. And the more the more you're kind of aware of what your monsters can do before you come in, and then you can kind of sit in that moment and like work on narrating things, the better you're going to get. And until you get to where you've done so many monsters that you can fly by the seat of your pants a little bit and pull in like a beholder here, or pull in, hobgoblin there, and this is kind of how they fight and this is what they do, and you can really have fun with it.
Yeah, for sure. Just as a little resource thing, I dropped in the link to the Monsters Know. If anybody was interested in that kind of thing, that's there in the. It's really simple, themonstersknow.com. So it's big help. Big help. Yeah,
all right, cool. We're going to jump to our NPC and then get to our haversack today. The NPC I will read for us today is Ezekiel Michaelmas. How would you say that? Michaelmas.
Yeah, Michaelmas, maybe.
Ezekiel Michaelmas, a mercenary mascot kind of guy. So that's a deep dent in your helmet here. I'll grab some hammers. You can tell me how you got it while I pound that out. This is a guy who, when he was 12 years old, Ezekiel was a scruffy kid with a big smile, clean dressed, well patched, hand me down. So he wasn't rich or anything. Tousle brown hair, green eyes. You can just think of this as your, all-American good kid, all-American. just a good kid, right? He asks these, he's grown up now, but he still asks these childishly innocent questions or kind of school logical questions that kind of cut to the moral heart of things that are going on. He's the troop's mascot. He's kind of like the water boy at a football game. His eyes are bright. Just the thought of being there and being among everything that's going on. He responds instantly to commands and requests. He's happy to be helping. His personality is that while he's always longed to be a warrior, he ended up getting this solid monastic education first in his life. And he tends to ask unintentionally piercing questions because of that logic that he was taught. And I think this is kind of cool because he can be that moral compass without even meaning to. His motivation, his mother always told him that his father was a warrior and he wants to be one too. And so his background is that he grew up in this monastery kind of as a cast off child. He was just, one too many and ended up at this monastery. He learned sums, logic, proper worship, but he always dreamed of being a warrior. And one day this squad, this troop of army comes marching along the Abbey Road. And that night he grabbed his things and basically snuck out to join the army. He marched behind him for a day and then he volunteered that night. And the captain took him in, put him to work. He enjoyed the kid's bright spirit, his cheerful enthusiasm, and the enthusiasm that brightened the men in the army up as well. And so that's who this guy is. Again, this is just kind of that NPC that is enjoyable to be around, loves what he's doing, is excited about everything, but also in kind of this, almost in this naive way, he asks these like really kind of piercing questions sometimes. And I love a character like this that you can throw in with your PCs because they're here and they're making these decisions. And sometimes your PCs can get to be a little morally gray, and to just have a guy who can like very innocently like say something that like puts them on point.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Sorry, I was like affirming and like, yeah. My mic was off for a second. So I think he's interesting. I like the like pointed kid in the game. Like for some reason, I feel like that tends to come up in my games for some reason. And just like, because you can say things and be like really like straightforward, I think, in ways that maybe are different with other characters. But I like him, and I think like I may even want to, if I was going to use him, to put him even like I'm picturing a troop of like human soldiers, like that he's following along with. Kind of, that's like the picture I have from this, at least. It doesn't have to be by any means, but I even find it interesting if like, what if it was a maybe more mixed, like monstrous even troop of not necessarily evil or anything, but just like you're not expecting this 12-year-old human kid to be palling around and helping this group. I think that like juxtaposing like, why is this person here, makes it a little complicated too, of like, okay, why is this kid here? And maybe we need to get this kid out of here. And he's like, no, I'm like, this is what I'm doing. I want this, kind of deal. So I find that kind of interesting. I also wondered about.
I was going to say, I think what you just basically said, this 12-year-old kid with them. In my mind, I was thinking, okay, it talks about when he was 12, this all happened. And in my mind, he had grown a little bit.
Oh yeah.
That's going to change. That's going to change the way this player feels for you. Because I was thinking, like a teen or maybe in his 20s, but he's still young. He's still naive. He's still got these bright eyes. He loves the idea, and he asks these questions. But when you say like a 12-year-old kid, that can change the way this feels for a good way, in a good way. And you may want to do something like that, as far as like, then people begin to like, not only like want to protect and care for him, but then he says these little things that kind of sharply hit them. And it's going to be harder for them to take offense at that in any way, because it's a 12-year-old kid. And yeah, you're muted again there.
Thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. We kind of had a different like view of that even too, reading that. I wondered about flipping it a little bit, and like, what does this look like if the PCs are the group that he starts following? like it's not his history, it's his present, like kind of thing, when it's like they're like, this kid won't leave us alone. Yeah. Like, I don't know how they're going to respond, but sometimes it's like, yeah, we're happy to adopt a team mascot kind of thing. And if you want to like knock the dents out of my helmet after a battle, cool, but like, or they may be like, no, we don't want this kid
Get
for,
away.
it's like, you're going to get killed, or like, we just don't want you here. I don't know how they're going to respond, but I find that kind of interesting too. If like, make it the story that's being told is this kid sees them go through the town and decides, I'm going to follow them because I've always wanted to be a warrior, kind of deal, just like my dad. And so I think that could be interesting too, and cause some like internal party stuff to go on. But too, I'm always a big fan of like the PCs adopting NPCs. I'm always putting people in their way to hopefully get them in the party. So,
and aside from moral like questions, the fact that he was like part of this monastic thing, and he learned like logic and,
right,
and
yeah.
sums, and like he basically had an education. So I think all the way back to a time when we were playing a game and we had a guy who was supposed to be this really intelligent like gadget or kind of fiddling with things, but he could never think of anything to fiddle with. And, I think you, Adam, in that game, you kept having these ideas. So this could be the kind of character that like helps kind of spur thoughts, creative thoughts. Sometimes, you're coming up on this bridge, but the bridge has been like cut and broken down or whatever. It's like a rope bridge and it's cut, and your players are all standing there trying to think about how to get over. None of them can fly. And like, this kid just naively like throws out something that might get them, if they can think of nothing, it might get their brains started.
Yeah. It's the kid when we're back in your Oracle of Order game where everybody's trying to push the door open and it's a pull, or vice versa. However, it's like, what if you pull? Like, that's a good use of an NPC also.
So there you go, an NPC that you might be able to throw in a game, and Ezekiel McCalmus.
Yeah, I like it. We have a couple haversacks that I'd love to touch on today if we've got time here.
We throw our questions in a haversack and we pull them out as we find them. And so what do we got today, Adam?
We have two. We've got one from Wataya Hotel and we've got one from Adam Whiteside. Let's start with Wataya's. Looking here, there's some that leads up to this question. So this is Haversack Question Casino Edition. Dear Matthew and Adam, regarding combat and rolling dice, when it comes to rolling for massive amounts of damage, do you feel that it's better to gather up all those dice, roll half and multiply the rest, or use a digital roller? I think when first showcasing a big bad's power, it can be really cool and intimidating to gather up all those D6s and roll them in front of the players. However, I can also see that this becomes time consuming and or a little obnoxious. What do both of you do when it comes to this dilemma? So we'll pause there because there's a little more in the email. But so basically the idea is like giant, massive damage. How do we deal with all those dice?
So he kind of hit my thoughts nail on the head, and that is like, okay, you come up against a monster and he just so many dice.
Right.
I think the first time doing that, to just explore the enormity of what is happening to you, and then if the battle goes on for a little while, I would probably switch to a digital roller. I'd be like, oh, I'll put in like 80 D6s here. And, you can show people like, look, 80 D6s. I can't believe all those ones came up. It's still this. I think that helps. If it is like, that's if it's going to happen again and again and again. Somebody falls from 200 feet, except for somebody named Ozoff. I like to roll a bunch of D6s to show them, like, again, the enormity of the damage they take from falling that far, unless they happen to be remarkable enough that it doesn't hurt them at all. Now, on the other side of that, that's when and this goes back to pacing. As the GM, I don't want my NPCs taken up all the time. But
Right.
if a PC like does amazing damage and they want to get like all these dice and roll them because that's one of their ways of fun, loving to
Yeah.
touch dice and just
Right.
showing
Yeah.
the awesomeness of that, I will let them. Now I'll
Yeah. Right.
typically tell them, add fast and try to do this as best you can. If you want to like, roll 3 and then triple it, if you would roll 9, D
Right. Yeah.
10s or whatever, that's fine. I try to I try to have them let me know that before they do it,
Yeah.
so they can't just roll 3 and they all happen to be high numbers and they're like, I'm just going to multiply that by 3. It's good. But if they roll 3 ones, they're like, and then the next 3,
Right. Stay
try to get an agreement before we start. But if it's a player's turn, I typically will allow those dice to make more, to show more through the night, because that's part of the, the excitement of seeing what's going to come. And then, what is that? The thrill of victory, the agony of defeat from the old, but yeah.
Yeah. I like that idea. I hadn't thought about that with this email, but like, definitely letting PCs have that moment, because that is super fun. When you get to roll a ton of dice, it's awesome, especially when they come up good.
And then have somebody who's really good at math help them add, especially those people who like, they're sitting there like 9 + 7 is what? Which is me sometimes. I'm not like hacking on anybody else. I'm like 16, and then you got to add another 5 to that, and it takes, there are other people who are like, that's 43.
Yeah. It's kind of like the note taker. You have the table adder, and that's good.
Right.
I when I was thinking about this question, and I feel like some of this I'm reiterating what you said, but I want to think about what the feeling I want to evoke in this. I think that matters. I do think like as time goes on, I don't want to like gather up 100 dice every time that enemy goes, because that is going to slog it, kind of thing. But
man, that first time,
what's the feeling I want to evoke? Because if I want to evoke dread, then I'm going to say, hey, could I have everybody's D6s? Can we gather those here?
You get them all, and you're like, I still need 17 more.
I mean, honestly, like it's like so this lich points his finger at Ozoff, and green sparks from the, and it's like, and while that happens, could you guys all start giving me your D6s, and you're like counting them out? Like that's dread that's being evoked, because it's like, oh shoot, there's a lot of numbers about to be rolled here, If you're wanting to evoke shock and awe, then you say and you take 75 damage, and like it's like, oh, like what, like kind of thing. I think that's a different kind of situation where you're rolling back here, or maybe using the dice roller, and it's like that's gonna feel different as a player. That's gonna feel different to me, where I'm like watching the GM like collect all these dice and get ready to roll, or I'm just suddenly told you took 90 damage in that one hit and you're on the ground, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that matters. I do like the idea of it leveling off as the battle goes, because of speed, and it's like, well, now you kind of know. Right. But like the third piece of that, like outside of the emotion of being evoked, is grabbing from what you said earlier, Matthew, with the other stuff, is like I just lost the word for it though, the like telegraphing kind of thing. That I think there's a slight telegraph, and maybe it's in the dread realm of the battle starts, and it's not like in the moment the lich points his finger and green sparks off of it and shoots towards this character, and now I need all your dice. Like, okay, we're in initiative, and hey, by the way, while you're doing initiative, could you guys pass me all your D6s? Because that's a different kind of feel of, oh shoot, something could happen in this battle that a bunch of D6s are come into play. And I think there's another feeling of that too, of that's like telegraphing, like this thing has the opportunity to have a big deal, not just like a big thing is happening and now we're going to wait on it. And I think there's different feelings that kind of come from that. So that's how I would think through that. But I do think like speed and efficiency is important regardless of all those things. So we're not like taking 15 minutes to roll a bunch of dice, because you don't want to sit there and do that unless you need a bathroom break. Then that's fine.
Right.
Yeah. Did you have anything more to say before I read the rest of Wataya's stuff here?
No.
there's a PS. I know you're always looking for a little inspiration for characters. That being said, I've been reading the novel 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And while there are a lot of cool ideas, one character in particular stood out to use in a D&D game. There's a character named Francisco the Man who's a bard who travels through a circuit of small villages. At each stop, people can pay him to put messages and or village news into music. As a result, he develops an increasingly long set list and becomes an important fixture in village life as a source of information. But I think the idea that a bard can do such things and that that certain information could be glossed over because no one cared to pay for it or couldn't afford to pass it along could be really fascinating for players. Thanks for the great show, for your continued inspiration to us ascending GMs. Sincerely, Wataya Hotel 98. I thought that was a cool idea and interesting to read too.
Yeah. So as you're thinking of the way you get information to people, keep in the back of the mind this bard character who people pay, and the fact that maybe they couldn't pay for something really important because they were too poor.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. That's interesting. So the second Haversack question we have today is from Adam Whiteside. This is not all the question that's on the screen right now, but it's kind of the meat of it. This is Haversack questions number 3 from Adam Whiteside. Matthew and Adam, congratulations on 1 year. It's been an absolute pleasure tuning into your podcast and catching the occasional live stream. I'm looking forward to the second year with great anticipation. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. We're excited too. My question this week is a difficult one. As a GM, your job is to portray and act out the world around your PCs, which lends itself to a somewhat impartial and logical mindset at times. But as we all know, sometimes the consequences of a PC's actions can damage the story that's being told. If the PCs unnecessarily alienate a faction whose help they need further down the line, allow a key NPC to die, forget/ignore a crucial magical item, etc., how much do you pad or handwave those repercussions? Completely? Just enough to keep the happy ending? Or do you let the PCs get pounded to death with the rest of the world in an animated bush apocalypse they accidentally or deliberately failed to stop? I like those callbacks there. So,
the animated bush was the first thing to kill me.
So keep up the good work. You can go back to episode 2, I believe, and listen to how Matthew got killed by an animated bush if you don't know what we're talking about.
Good times.
But yeah. So yeah, how do you feel like that, Matthew, as far as if the PCs kind of miss something or kill the person that you thought was going to be the key, to the end, or like what would you do?
Well, the first thing that I do is I think, okay, is there any way this complication could make it more interesting? That's always like the first thing in my mind. They do something I don't expect. They kill somebody that was part of the story. They, pass this thing. How could I make that an interesting part of the story? And so, I always talk about sitting down and writing, what if? Okay, what if they pass this, and then do I wait till later when they find out they really need it and then make a side quest that they have to get back to it? Or, this person dies, then because of that, do they find out what? Could it be that this other person is more important than anybody expected? Or could it be that, so first, I think, is there a way to make this interesting? And then secondly, it depends on I think you said it, the just enough to keep a happy ending. I think typically I'm never going to be the GM who my goal is to kill the party and the campaign just ends. Everybody dies and it's over. To me, that's not a lot of fun, and to most players. And so, rarely will that be the way something ends. I will find a way to make it still. It's like video games. There has to be a way to win. If there is absolutely no way to win, nobody wants to play that video game. I think that was what was that one called back in the 80s that was like a cartoon that was so stinking hard. Oh, somebody out there in our viewership is going to know. It was like a Don Bluth. If you remember Don Bluth, he was this animator for Disney, and he went off and did his own films. And then I think he was the one that made this game, Dragon something. Somebody out there knows. And it was like back when games cost $0.25, it cost like $1 to play this game, and you would get killed like instantly. It was just so
Wow.
stinking hard. And so,
Yeah.
as cool as the game looked, nobody
Right.
ever wanted to play it because it was just like you knew you were just going to be disappointed.
Yeah. Right.
And I don't want that to be my campaign. I want it to be beatable.
Yeah.
And so I will find interesting ways to do that. So sometimes I may hand wave something. Sometimes, most times, I'm going to look for how can I incorporate Dragon's Lair. There you go. Two people
Dragon's
jumped
Lair,
in
there you go.
immediately, and they were
Wow.
right. Dragon's Lair. That was the video game. But anyway, most of the time, I'm going to look at how can I twist this to make it more interesting.
Yeah.
Now that they have complicated things.
Right.
That's
yeah.
me.
Yeah, I think that's great. That idea of like where does it now go versus I do think that's important of like nothing is
Unovercomerable. That's a
yeah,
good word, by the way.
I was thinking like nothing is so important is not the right word, like integral, like that you can't keep moving forward without it. You know, like I think that's an important like piece of like things can be replaced or changed. I think there's like two things I would question in the midst of that. So uh they needed like they're part of the big story that we're talking, like the giant ruby needs to be taken back to put it on the pedestal of the treasure room of the, you know, of Paylor. Like that has to happen like to finish this thing and like to stop the plague from ravaging the world. And like okay, but they dropped the ruby into the lava and it exploded. Like okay, so we like screwed up. There's like two pieces for me of like, did they know what it was? Because if they didn't, then maybe something else can actually be that thing. Like it
Right.
doesn't have to be that. Like I think there's like a shift in our brain that maybe could, okay, it's not actually that thing, it's this other thing, and they're gonna have to like strive to get it now. But we can shift our mindset and say, okay, this is actually the thing they need to do. I think that's possible. If they did know it, then like letting them know deeper consequences of okay, like not, and obviously we're not just saying this as the GM, like this is going to be played out in the game or they're going to find it out, but okay, that's a big deal. There are going to be consequences. The plague is not going to be checked now. It's going to remain going across the way, but maybe there's other ways we can deal with this. And that's now kind of, and it can come back into the stream that maybe we had, but like for a bit, it needs to veer out and we need to go get this other thing or deal with, you know, figuring out a ritual to stop it or whatever. Yeah, there's some chat here.
Yeah, and
Rob,
like what Rob just said there, yeah. Okay, so yeah, you were getting ready to go back and say, yeah, it's good to have multiple solution
Right.
to a big problem. But then what Rob said there in our chat, for those of you who can't see the chat later, he said, yeah, they may not get the S rank ending though. If faction 2 is alienated, but they still get the A rank. I do think so. Like I had I think if you have prophecy, sometimes you have to like keep a part in there. I think in a game I played, there was a drop of blue, a drop of gold, and it was like the combined blood of a blue dragon and a gold dragon. Basically, there was a dragon that was born of those two. And if something would have happened, they would have killed, or that thing would have been like fallen into the abyss of no end, and they could no longer find it, or whatever it was, that there would have to be another way to get a drop of blue and a drop of gold. But since you couldn't get it in this this one unique creation that happened, you would, maybe instead, that blood from that dragonborn that was a mixture of those two would totally purify this thing. But now you had to go about and get, two different kinds of blood. And when you mix them, it's going to cause a contaminated sort of solution.
Right. Yeah.
Again, it's not the S rank ending. It's not the best, but you can get it done, and now it's going to cause some further complications that then make you do other things.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. And, I also think from another standpoint, like sometimes a lot of times, like my initial idea is not as actually good as the ideas that the party comes up with when they are put under duress, kind of thing, where it's like, okay, I kind of had this idea of like, this is how they would fix this. And then they're like coming up with these really cool creative things. I'm like, if that's what they're wanting to go with, that's going to be a really cool way to resolve it. Could it have been resolved the way I was thinking? Yeah, totally. But I think like leaving that open too, and like um, doing a little bit of like getting return on the creativity that they come up with to fix the problem that they kind of half created by their own intentions, originally. Like I think that can be a cool piece too. So but yeah, having Evan said that, multiple solutions to the campaign, big problem. That's a good way to go about that too. Yeah.
By the way, unrelated to anything, when I was a kid, it was the 70s, because I'm older than a lot of people here. But we had, you get an F, that's really bad. You get a D, it's a little better, but still bad. C, B, A. When did S become like, and I'm guessing that's like superior, or when did the S, is that a business thing that came to be? Does anybody remember? I don't think that was going on when I was a kid. S being better than A, but it has. And I've read lots of books where they talk about like the skill that this guy gained was an S rank skill. And I'm like, I don't know when that started. Maybe some of you out there can fill me in sometime.
Yeah. I cannot answer it. So Adam went on, hopefully that's helpful, Adam. But he goes on, P.S. You mentioned in the anniversary episode that you want to start doing some practical walkthroughs of some of the theories you've been talking about. I'm great at coming up with cool vignettes, but struggle to keep the bigger narrative in mind from session to session, which ultimately turns my campaigns into a series of unrelated one-shots. It says, darn, that's not always bad. So just keep your chin up on that, because that could be a cool thing. But it sounds like you want more. Anyway, he goes on to say, I would love a series of episodes where the two of you build a complete campaign narrative, including arcs, themes, spotlights, special magic items from scratch to showcase the process. So that's a cool thing for us to keep in mind, of maybe doing some build together, some arcs and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. That'll be interesting, because my way of building is go with a notebook and into a cabin or the woods and sit for a week thinking. We'll do that on air for a full week of me just sitting and thinking with a pencil.
There was that, one of my favorite things, weirdly, was the dude who plays Ron Swanson on Parks and Rec.
Can't
remember his name right now, but
Ron Swanson.
He did that Christmas time where he just sat in front of a fire in a like big chair, had a drink, and just looks at the camera, and you think he's going to talk, and then he doesn't. And just that's all he did for an hour, and then it just fades to black. And I was I watched the whole thing, and I was sat there with anticipation. I'm like, I love this. I don't know if anybody else out there would watch that, but it's awesome. It's probably on YouTube. Anyway, we could have our own version of that, where it's just you writing in a journal and nothing's ever said,
looking up at the screen occasionally. This is how Matthew does it.
I do think we probably could.
We could do something,
talk through it, but
for sure.
Yeah, there is a lot of that kind of thought that I think, I don't know, everybody kind of has their own process, but I think there's a lot of internal mind stuff. And for me, I'm always driving, and I'm hey, ask my wife, hey, could you scribble a note on this? Or I'm making a voice memo, or I'm washing the dishes and figuring that.
Accidentally hit the button to end there. I'm not trying to end Adam. Right. You're talking too long. Boom.
The cane comes out and pulls me off screen. Those, I'm always in the midst of, I'm washing dishes or mowing the yard or something, and I'm oh, that would be a sweet idea, but those things, we all have our different ways, but I think that would be cool to take some time to do that at some point. Maybe and replace one of our encounter prompts or something one day and talk through it. So yeah, thanks Adam for your questions too today. It's good.
Yeah.
And also thank you all in the chat. You guys all hung with us for a long time, and appreciate your conversation too. That's going on in there.
Yeah. And so now I'm going to pretend like I have some dude named Sammy who rolls our music. Roll the music, Sammy. Because now we are going to end. We're glad you could join us today for this second in the series of rolling dice. And I think we're still continuing that next time.
Yep. I think we've got 5 or so, and we're going to be looking at skill challenges.
Skill challenges.
Skill challenges.
Next time. Hey, thank you all for joining us here on Rise of the GM. Be sure to join us next time for Rolling Dice Skill Challenges. See you guys then.